Okay, well, since it is 1:30, I'll just stop introducing myself. So my name is Daniel Shea. I work in the British Embassy Network along with Hillary. I work at the British Consulate General in Chicago, where as part of my job, I oversee the administration of the Marshall Scholarship for the Chicago region, which is the largest and most applied to region in the country. So it's quite a big task, but it's very rewarding, obviously, to get to do this job and help select people for this very prestigious scholarship. And there's some fantastic applicants that we've seen come through, and obviously some very fantastic alumni. So obviously, this is part of the virtual Marshall Scholar Summit. I'm going to put a very helpful Twitter link in the chat right now, which is from Hillary's Twitter feed, UK and San Francisco, but it lists out all the other sessions. So if you haven't registered for the climate session after this, please do feel free to go and do that. That's kicking off in an hour's time. It should be really interesting. So obviously, this session is focused on application questions, which are kind of the most broadly applicable, no pun intended. And so I just want to start by saying this session will be recorded. So if you know someone, a potential scholar, a fellowship advisor, or any faculty contacts, anything like that, that would appreciate watching, we will be posting these links online now on our various Twitter feeds. And but I think we'll kick off now because it's 1:31 and I know we want to get started. So I think we'll just start by, I'm going to introduce our three panelists quickly, and I'll kick to them. So first of all, we have Vince Evans, who is the Development Officer for Free Arts for Abused Children of Arizona. He previously worked at the Office of Federal Programs in the Missouri Department of Education, the Mississippi Museum of Art as Director of Resource Development and Special Projects, and the University of Mississippi. He's originally from New York, and he is himself a Marshall Scholar and a graduate of the University of Oxford. We also have Alicia Hayes, who's been a fellowship advisor at the University of California, Berkeley for nearly 20 years, the role in which she has served thousands of UC Berkeley students in applying for scholarships like the Marshall, is helping read for and select the winners of some national scholarships herself. She's also been a board member and officer for the National Association of Fellowship Advisors, known as NAFA, holds graduate degrees in history and public administration. And lastly, we have Katie Clark, who is the chair of the Los Angeles Regional Selection Committee for the Marshall Scholarship and has been that since 2015. She's an Oxford-trained historian specializing in cultural history of the late medieval Mediterranean and an LA-based entrepreneur and activist. She also chairs the National Women's Political Caucus in the Greater Pasadena area and founded the Applied Humanities PR marketing agency serving mission-driven businesses and nonprofits. So three people with a breadth of knowledge on this particular topic from various perspectives. So first, I'd like to just kick it to our panelists quickly to lead off. Tell us, besides the bios I just read, a bit about yourselves, why you applied to be Marshall Scholar, and what it's meant to you personally. I guess we want to kick off with Vince, since I started with you. Do you want to start us off?
Sure, yeah. Why I applied for the scholarship was because I read Bill Clinton's autobiography, and he talked about his time in England, and I thought, that sounds like fun. Let me go do that. So I applied for a Rhodes, and when I applied for the Rhodes, the scholarship advisor at my American undergraduate alma mater, which was Fordham University, said, well, have you ever heard of the Marshall Scholarship? And I hadn't. So she explained it to me, and I thought, well, my objective is just to kind of go study in the UK. So let me go ahead and apply for that as well. And the thing that I'll emphasize about the application process for people who are considering applying is that for me, so much of the value of the application process had to do with learning how to tell a story about myself, where I was from, what I was doing, and where I was going. That was really kind of informative and helped shape the vision that I was developing for my life. So I think one of the great things about the process is that you can really walk away from it having learned a lot and having derived a lot of value out of it, even if you don't get the scholarship. I really worked very hard on my application, which I think maybe sounds a little trivial, but I think I probably wrote like 42 different drafts of my personal statement. And I had this feeling in the back of my mind that if I didn't work hard, and then in 5 years, I met somebody who won a Marshall Scholarship, and I thought like, oh, I easily could have won this thing. If I just put in a little more effort, I'd like really regret it. So I wanted to make sure that that wasn't a thing. And it wasn't a thing because I put in the work. And then I remember in one of my last sort of mock interviews in preparation for the process, I had a professor say something to the effect of, well, there's no question that like you could get it. The only question now is like, are you lucky enough? And my experience in working with people, really well-qualified college students who've applied for the Marshall Scholarship, is that there's always way more qualified candidates than there are scholarships available. And I've worked with people who I thought, like, in some ways, it's almost a crime that I got a scholarship and they didn't. So for example, I had a student I worked with once named Trey, who was working on Welsh. And he was just so thoroughly committed to the vision that he had for his life in the UK that even though he didn't get the scholarship, he kind of self-funded his study in Wales afterwards, which is exactly what you want from a candidate. You know, you want somebody who really needs to be in the UK to get to where they're going. So that's a little bit of background on me, why I applied and what I got out of it. I will turn it over to whoever's next.
Alicia, do you want to go next?
Certainly. First of all, I am not a Marshall Scholar, but I'll tell you why it's one of the programs that I love to advise on. Similar to what Vince shared about his reasons and what he got out of the Marshall Scholarship, what I love is to help students really identify, you know, a little bit about who they are and where their goals lie and why the UK is an excellent place to open up their future. And the Marshall specifically has so many possibilities in terms of where students can pursue their graduate studies. And so it's one of those programs that provides so many possibilities to applicants. I've had the fortunate experience to advise, I believe, 9 Marshall Scholars during my tenure at Berkeley, and just seeing how they've developed over the years. And again, I think that this is such a wonderful opportunity. There are so many wonderful universities, and I had also the fortunate experience to visit many in the UK. And so for those of you who are prospective applicants, I'm very happy that you're considering this. And the application itself, I think the process helps you learn about yourself.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for that. And lastly, but not leastly, Dr. Clark.
Hi, well, I'm delighted to be here, and it's great to see all of you. Yeah, as Dan mentioned, I am the chair of the LA Regional Selection Committee, which means I have the privilege of seeing hundreds of incredibly qualified candidates come before us every year. And, you know, I'll echo, I think, what's already been said, which is that there are always more amazing applicants than there are scholarship spots. You know, when I applied for a Marshall Scholarship, it was really because I had a very specific program in mind that I wanted to do at Oxford. It was part of a very specific academic plan that I was really committed to, and I totally believed in, and I did that plan, and I went all the way through, and I finished my PhD, and then, you know, I found myself, however many years later, doing something totally different. And that's fine, because I think what the Marshall does really well is it selects bright, interested, public service kind of focused individuals who, as Vince said, are really good at telling a compelling story about what they want to do right now. But from the, you know, from the sort of selection committee side of the table, I can tell you that one of the things we really care about is, does an applicant's rationale for going to the UK make sense with where they are in their life right now? And do we see that individual making a serious contribution to the world, whether it's in that specific narrative that they set forth or not? And so I think that, you know, part of what I've taken away from my time as, you know, a selection committee member is just understanding how holistic the process is, and how we try to understand that, you know, yes, you have to present a compelling package, but it's also about understanding where somebody's coming from, where they're going, realizing that we're seeing them at one very specific moment in the trajectory of their life, and that will inevitably be more complex, more nuanced, and, you know, probably less linear than they imagine and than we imagine. So it's really a very holistic process, and I think that's what makes Marshall Scholars a really interesting and special group of folks.
Thank you for that. And I will say, yes, this is obviously the Marshall Scholarship, for anyone who's uninitiated, is a UK government offered scholarship. The name kind of gives it away. It's intended as thanks from the UK government to the United States for help during and after World War II and the Marshall Plan. So to that end, and I should have said this up front, apologies, I will just note really quickly that we're holding this session kind of despite the fact that the UK government is currently observing the passing, obviously, of the Duke of Edinburgh. That's partially why this session hasn't been promoted quite as widely online. So please do, just want to reiterate, if there are contacts or friends or colleagues that would appreciate seeing these sessions and didn't have a chance to catch the notification in time, given that, please do feel free to pass this on afterwards. But I do want to turn back to the panel and get some discussions going, because obviously the application is one of the most important parts of the Marshall Scholarship. It's going to determine whether or not an applicant gets it or not. And we have some really fantastic applicants from a wide variety of backgrounds. And so Vince, as the Marshall Scholar kind of writ large on our panel, I want to ask you really quickly, I know you were a first generation college student. And so you also became a first generation Marshall, as it were. So I guess, what did becoming a Marshall Scholar specifically mean to you, and what would you want other folks, they're either first generation college students or they never applied for a scholarship, they don't have that kind of support network necessarily from their family built in. What would you want them to know going into this process?
So one thing that comes to mind is that there are a lot of resources in most universities to support students who are first generation college students and applying for the Marshall Scholarship. I'll share just a quick story from my application experience, which is, we had a special program at Fordham called the Matteo Ricci Society, which was administered by the prestigious fellowships office. And the purpose of the program was to recruit and connect students who were going to be good candidates for the Marshall, the Rhodes, the Fulbright, the Gates, et cetera. And so the idea was you were sort of like the people who administered this program, like scouting for people who might win a Rhodes Scholarship. And it's really important work at a place like Fordham, where you don't necessarily punch above your weight in terms of how many Rhodes and Marshalls you get. I think Fordham just got their first Marshall since I won one in 2005 this year. So they're really trying to figure out, like, how can we identify the kids who are most likely to be successful in this process? And I was not one of those kids, because I didn't come into the university through the traditional channels. Some of the kids who were in this program had parents who were like faculty members or who were in the administration at Fordham. And so they knew the right people. They were kind of tracked in this program. They were given all these resources. And I wasn't one of them. But I did show up at the door of the prestigious fellowships office. And I did say, here's why I want to apply and here's what my credentials are. And at that point, they just treated me like they treated everybody else. And then I made it very far in the process. I was a finalist. And when I was a finalist, the woman who was running this office at the time, her name was Kim. She now works at MIT doing similar work. She had the wherewithal to ask me what I plan to wear to the interview. And I was like, I'll probably wear, like, when I described whatever I was planning on wearing. She said, well, do you need a suit? And she knew that I just didn't have the financial resources to own a suit at the time. And so they took me to Macy's. They had me measured for a suit. And that's how I got the first suit that I ever owned. And I actually still have the tie that I wore to that interview, because it's got a kind of certain sentimental value to me for that. So that's what I mean by there are tremendous resources. And I didn't at the time have, I think, the presence of mind to ask that question. And so I would encourage students who maybe are in a similar situation to be very forthcoming about those kinds of things. Like, I don't have transportation to get there, or I'm worried about being able to pay for meals if I have to travel somewhere for a finals interview or something like that. And then I took some personal satisfaction winning the scholarship. I was proud of it, but more than anything else, I was proud for the people who'd invested in me throughout my education. There were people who were not related to me by blood or by law. They had no obligation to me whatsoever. And they had invested considerable resources in terms of their time, their energy, their own financial support to making sure that I was successful in my academic career. And it was very gratifying to be able to look at the pleasure that they derived from it, because in a way it made them feel like their investment had been worthwhile. So just on a kind of purely personal level, my personal story, that was one of the things that was most satisfying about that.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly important point. Universities have tremendous resources. I think, this has been mentioned in a couple other sessions throughout the summit, but if you haven't been in contact with your university's fellowships office, please do go check what resources are available, get to know your advisors. And also, even if you're not, as some of the marshals have said throughout other sessions, if your university doesn't offer kind of the breadth of resources that you're hoping for or expecting, the Marshall Scholarship Alumni Association, a lot of former scholars are happy to talk to prospective applicants and help them through the process, explain what they did, how they did it. And furthermore, when you do apply to the process, if you're invited to interview, for example, we, through the Consulate Network, the Marshall Scholarship will fund your travel, if there is travel for interviews at that point, to fund your travel to come and interview for the scholarship. We'll help out with that sort of stuff. So there are ways to make sure that you have everything you need to apply to this process, either from university, from the Alumni Association, from the consulates. We are here to help you, students, more than anything else. And if you're a fellowship advisor, please do make sure that message is passed on, that we want students to get this scholarship. And so, Vince, I'll stick with you really quickly before moving on to other panelists as well. But I do want to ask, since the UK is such an integral part of the Marshall, because it is a UK government scholarship, and specifically, like Dr. Clark mentioned, part of the selection criteria is kind of why will going to the UK specifically make a difference for you? How did studying in the UK specifically make a difference for you as compared to studying a graduate program somewhere in the US or elsewhere?
Yeah, so the story that I told in my application, which was, why I wanted to go to the UK, it had to do with wanting to work with 3 faculty members at Oxford in particular. So the big picture story about my application was I wanted to go to Oxford because I was interested in life in public service. And I was particularly interested in political disputes that had become irreconcilable or incommensurable, where people would just kind of talk past each other and never be able to see eye to eye about things. And so there were 3 people at Oxford in particular who I wanted to work with on that issue, and I did. And then but the other part of it, I think, is so much of what I learned and so much of the value that I derived from the Marshall Scholarship were things that happened outside of the classroom. So whether it was, hanging out with friends late into the night at the Megaron, which was the college bar in Holywell Manor where I lived when I went to Oxford, or the friendships that I formed at that bar, like with my very good friend Andrew Hay, who passed away a couple of years ago. But I spent, for example, one summer hiking the coast of Scotland with him and his family and staying at a cottage that they owned. And those conversations shaped me, my relationship with this particular person and his family and their connection to their community became an important part of my experience there. And it's something that has kind of endured, it's something that you don't necessarily anticipate happening when you go over there. But as we all know, a lot of Marshall scholars meet their spouses in the UK. They end up living over there kind of permanently. And I think this is a big part of the strategic picture of the Marshall Scholarship. It's not just thank you. It's an investment in a great relationship. And if it didn't continue to build that relationship and to build the brand of the United Kingdom among a certain group of Americans, I don't know if the UK government would continue to fund it. So I can continue to see myself as an ambassador for the UK here in the United States and remind my friends in the US and higher education and government about the kind of priority, the level of priority that our relationship with the UK should take.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I do want to turn to both Alicia and Dr. Clark next, since this is kind of on the nitty gritty of applications, which I know is probably what a lot of people are wondering about, how do I get this right? So I'd ask both of you, what is a common mistake people make? What is the section people don't give the effort they should or need to focus a bit more on, or what really would sell an application in your view that maybe students might not be thinking of otherwise?
If I may, I think that as far as the personal narrative or the personal statement, at times I feel that when I review an initial draft of an application, applicants aren't as forthcoming of their motivations of why they are doing what they want, what they're currently doing, and why the UK is the place to continue that. So the biggest piece of advice that's already been alluded to is to really sell why you wish to do what you say you want to do in the UK. How is that appropriate? How is this going to continue to potentially connect you with the community that you may establish or cultivate while you're there? And so that needs to come through in the statements.
Yeah, I think that's terrific advice. I'd like to sort of talk about the application package as a whole from sort of a 10,000 foot view, and then speak to each section. And one of the things I'll say is that the application is designed very intentionally, right? So every year, all the selection committee chairs and consular personnel and members of the MAC, the Marshall Aid Commemoration Commission, we all get together in Washington, D.C., and we go through the application with a fine-tooth comb, and we ask, like, did it do a good job of helping us to know these kids better? Did it serve them well, or did it obscure what we were trying to find out? And so, we'll adjust question wording, we'll adjust essay length, we'll adjust the order things appear in, all kinds of things, because it's a constantly iterative process to try to get to, a better, albeit always imperfect, understanding of who these applicants are, and to give them the best shot, because what we want is for applicants to be successful. We are, as a group of selectors, our goal is for everybody to show to their absolute best advantage. It's not designed to trip you up or catch you out or, make you look stupid, or it's designed to give you as many opportunities to tell your story in a compelling way. And so for that reason, a lot of things have changed about the application over time. I mean, when I went through the process in 2005, Vince and I were in the same class. So it's changed a lot. The application's changed a ton, and the way it works now is very different, because it also acknowledges things that in 2005 weren't necessarily on people's radar in the way that they should have been. Like, hey, if you have to work for a living, to support yourself or your family or other folks through the course of your college education, your extracurricular activities might necessarily look different. And that's really important information for us to know, right? So, we try to get at all the angles that an applicant comes from. And so certainly all of those biographical pieces are important. And I think, just being as honest as you can about what those are from a lens of investment, right? Where do you spend your time and where do you spend your energy in meaningful ways? Because, we've all seen applications with like pages and pages and pages of extracurricular or leadership or whatever it is stuff. And you look at it and you're like, okay, I'm sure this person's amazing, but there's no way that they're actually investing in all of these things at the same level, right? Like, a lot of this has got to be filler. So what's important to you? What do you spend your time doing? What's meaningful to you? And why is that meaningful? That helps us understand who you are and how to assess the information that you're giving us. So sometimes it's easy, I think, to blow past some of that biographical information, but it actually does add a whole lot of context. And then, I'd echo what Alicia said about the statements. I think being as honest as you can is really helpful. At the same time, I think we want to be respectful of where candidates are coming from and realizing that there are things that are and are not the purview of the committee to necessarily know a whole lot about. So, whether that's life events or, things that have happened, basically looking at your application with a sort of objective eye and asking, are there unanswered questions? Would somebody who doesn't know me look at this and understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, why I'm making the argument I want to make for why I need to go to the UK? Does that make sense? Or are there gaps? And if there are gaps, like, how do we fill those in a way that feels authentic and upfront, but also feels comfortable to the applicant?
Absolutely. No, I think, like I said, as someone who, much like you in a different capacity, as someone who has worked in the applications process and run through bringing scholars on board, I think that's absolutely true. I think it's about quality. Quantity, obviously, as well, showing that you can handle a lot of things and juggle a lot of things. But I think making very clear what you are passionate about, and how that passion will be articulated and refined in the UK. Alicia, I do want to ask you specifically as well. You've obviously had a number of successful Marshall applicants under your wing, so to speak. What would you say is a commonality, or between all of them? What is the thing that you think has really kind of been the silver bullet for the scholars you've seen that have gone the distance?
I'll be very honest with you. One of the things that I always tell students is that there's not an archetype of said scholar. So I would argue that there really isn't a common theme other than through their materials, they've made it explicitly clear of, again, why it is, whatever it is they want to do, why the UK, and that they're people who are motivated to make a difference, whether it's at a very small level or a very large, grandiose level. We can see that this person is going to change things, and we want to see them succeed. So that's something that through all of the scholars that I've worked with over the years, that's the one thing that I would say would be the one little common nugget. But I do always adhere to the fact that I feel that there isn't an archetype of a Marshall Scholar, that they come from all backgrounds and have all different types of preparation, and they're going to accomplish a multitude of things in many different fields.
No, and that is absolutely important. I think it's critical to remember that, this Marshall Scholarship is for people basically of any field. It's up to the applicant to make their case why they should get the scholarship and what it means to them. But I think the selection committees reflect that. In Chicago, for example, our selection committee has had a lawyer, an epidemiologist, a chemist, a wide variety of backgrounds. We want to make sure that as you're going through the process, you have someone who understands what you're talking about. I've seen some of our committee members get into lengthy, wonky back and forths on the nitty gritty of how this chemical interaction works. And it's fascinating, but also I think it's important to remember, that's what this is for. We want to see you, and in the application, in the interview, we want you to give us you. If you want to go down a rabbit hole and explain why you were going to find polymer that, whatever, I'm not a science person, but like that is encouraged, and it's frankly celebrated. And I think that's a key part of the scholarship. And Dr. Clark, I saw your mic light up for a second. Did you want to come in on that?
Well, yeah, I think that's absolutely right. One of the really special things about the Marshall Scholarship is its diversity. And that's diversity not just in the selection of scholars, but it's diversity in terms of field of study, right? It's disciplinary diversity. And the fact that this is the only fellowship of its kind that funds you to study at any university in the UK, right? So it's not just Oxford, it's not Cambridge, it's not London. If the absolute best program in the world for doing what you want to do is at the University of East Anglia, awesome. Yes, let's do that. East Anglia all the way, right? So it's about understanding that, a collection of sort of the brightest young people from the United States who are interested deeply in important questions across a diversity of fields will change the world, right? And that commitment to knowing that, we need amazing meteorologists and actors and philosophers and mathematicians and physicists and, public servants and all kinds of folks, like that diversity makes what we do so unique. And I think that it's something that all the selection committees, of course, really care about, but it's also something that we try to prioritize in our process of evaluation. We always want to assign a subject matter expert to read an application. If you're a super advanced machine learning person, we may not have somebody who's exactly in your field, but we'll have somebody close enough who can help the committee understand where you're coming from. And that level of academic merit and academic rigor really does set the scholarship apart.
Absolutely. I know we're getting through the end of our time now, so I do want to turn from the application a bit to the interview. And Vince, if I could start with you, obviously you have interviewed for a Marshall Scholarship. You've been through this process. I know, like you said, there are a lot of questions about, what should I wear? What should I say? And so what would you say, is the best way to manage that, manage your nerves, manage your preparation, and just set yourself up for success if you do get to that interview stage of the process?
Yeah, so dress smart and get there early. I actually have a friend, and I think Katie actually knows this person, so I won't name names, but he won a Rhodes, but not a Marshall because he showed up 15 minutes late to his Marshall interview. So there's no question that he was qualified. He just wasn't on time. And some people couldn't get past that. So show up early. And then the nerves thing, I think that's highly individual. I had a very particular outcome in my interview, which was, I had a full-time job when I was in college, which was fixing computers. So I spent most of my time like fixing, computer problems for faculty members and administrators at the university. I rarely got to talk to people about the ideas that I was really interested in. So I approached the interview as like a conversation with some really smart, curious people who wanted to ask me probing questions and who were kind of curious, really curious about me. Again, in a way that like people in my 9-to-5 were just not interested in me. But like their level of interest in me was like, can you or can you not fix the printer problem? So, if you look at it like that, again, then you get to walk away from the experience with having had a really interesting 30-minute conversation with some of the most remarkable people you'll ever meet in your life. And that was the way I did it. I found it really took the pressure off of me. And so that'd be my advice. You're going to prep for it. But the other thing that I would say is, Katie, and you could kind of comment on this, I think, and whether or not this is the same, but I was told when I was preparing for my interview that part of the purpose of the interview was to take me to the limit of what I knew, because the committee also wants to see, well, how does the candidate react when they don't know something, or when we ask a question that's kind of out of left field. And in my interview, the question had something to do with like my interpretation of a particular passage from some Platonic dialogue, and because my background was in philosophy and I hadn't read that dialogue, and I wasn't really familiar with the context. So I just kind of had to wing it. I was like, well, I don't know. I don't think I've read that dialogue. And somebody said, well, aren't you a philosopher? Shouldn't you have read this? And I was like, yeah, he wrote a lot of dialogues. I just haven't read all of them. I said, but based on what he's saying, I mean, it sounds like, and so I just kind of talked about it. I just focused on the idea. I was aware of the game that we were playing. They were trying to get me a little bit unsettled, but also that, again, like this is natural. There's a point at which we're all going to run up against the limits of our knowledge, and then curious, interesting people respond with curiosity and with interest. And so that was the way that I tried to respond. And then the other thing that I would say is don't be afraid to hang a lantern on your problem. So I came to my interview with a very particular sort of political agenda. It was well known because I've written about it in my personal statement, what my political affiliations were. And one of the panelists sort of asked me, or one of the people in the interview committee asked me, like, well, like that's all fine, well and good, but how are you going to pay for it? And I was like, well, I don't really know how I'm going to pay for it. That's why I want to go study economics, so I can learn how to pay for these really big ideas that I have. So don't be afraid to say that kind of thing as well.
I know we kind of threw a bone there, Dr. Clark. Did you want to come in and talk about that at all? How things may have?
Yeah, I mean, I think Vince nailed it. Like, that's exactly right. I mean, the goal of the selection committee in the 30 minutes we have with you in an interview is to give you the best shot to make your case, right? So if you have made it to the point where you're a finalist, multiple people, have advocated for you as members of the committee. And they've said, like, we think this kid has something special. We want to know more about what they're doing. We want to ask some questions. We want to understand. So we're pulling for you. We want every single applicant who comes in that room to blow us away. And the best problem to have is a really, really difficult deliberation process at the end. That's what we really want every single time. So we're rooting for you. I think, there is this sort of, I don't know, like lore about the fellowship interview process, and some of it's Rhodes and some of it's Marshall, and it's like, they'll ask you questions in a foreign language if you say you speak it, and then you have to be ready to like do these, Cirque du Soleil academic performances or whatever it is. And I think that's probably more a relic of the past. I mean, to be perfectly honest, when I did my interview, I rolled in and I was like, listen, I want to study medieval history. I want to do it at Oxford because they're super, intense about like Latin and diplomatic and paleography and reading manuscripts and all this stuff. I don't know how to do it. And one of the committee members, and I won't say what region I interviewed in, but one of the committee members like slid this medieval manuscript across the table to me and was like, well, what do you make of this? And I was like, I don't know, my guy. Like, that's literally what I'm telling you. Just like what Vince is saying, I'm like, this is the reason I need to go to the UK, but here's my best shot. And you kind of work your way through it. And it's about seeing what your thought process is. And I think all of the committees are interested in finding out how you think, how you problem solve, how you respond to challenges. Like graduate schools, it's just tough, right? Whether you do it in the US or in the UK or any place else, it's hard and it's challenging and it will push you. And we want to see a little bit about how you respond to pressure, and not from a, like a malicious or a way where we want to see you fail. We want to give you an opportunity to work through something. So if you need a minute, take a minute and say, wow, I don't know, I really wasn't expecting that. Let me think about it. And then talk through your thought process with us. We want to see how you think.
And then Alicia, I'll give you the final word on the kind of interview. You know, how do you tell your scholars or prospective scholars, or how do you prep them for this? What are your tips to them to make sure they get this right?
There are a number of ways that we prep students. I mean, we do a mock interview. I tend to want to do a group mock interview because we usually have multiple finalists, and I think it's good to have them listen to each other and see how they might respond to potential questions. But I always tell candidates to see the process as though you're having a conversation with the panel, whoever they are. And the goal of the panel is to learn more about you. They've learned about you in writing, on paper, in your application. So they're just wanting to see you in person, meet you in person, have this exchange, and, you know, have a conversation. And you're the expert on you and what you know. What you don't know, you can't handle. So that kind of alludes to what Dr. Clark and Vince said. There are no trick questions. It's really all about you, and just be who you are, and you can't go wrong.
All right. I want to turn over to Q&A in a moment, but before that, I just want to give it back to Dr. Clark for 1 minute, because last year, quite possibly, or probably this year, interviews were virtual. The first time ever in the history of the Marshall, which obviously changes things a little bit. So Dr. Clark, what would you say, having just gone through this, you know, what's different and what do you need to know, what do you need to be prepared for, besides obviously no need to travel, when it comes to the virtual interview?
You know, it was so interesting. And I think the feedback from my committee and some of the other committees that I heard was that it really was unexpected in a lot of ways, in that some students who, you know, would have been more nervous in person were much more relaxed, or some students who would have been more relaxed in person were more nervous. You know, we tried to give people a lot of guidance around, like, you know, how to set yourself up for success and prepare. And, you know, we all were kind of coming at this from the same, we'll give it our best shot angle. But I think, you know, back to what Ms. Hayes was just saying, our goal is to get to know you a little bit as a person, because apart from, you know, the academic merit and, you know, the leadership capacity that you have as an applicant, we're really looking for people who are going to continue to serve in an ambassadorial role for the rest of their lives, right? People who are going to continue to build and maintain and prioritize the special relationship between the US and the UK for decades to come. And a lot of that is down to kind of how you are with people and how you come off in the room. And there's no one right way to be, right? It doesn't mean you have to be super outgoing and an extrovert and really bubbly. It could be that you're just a really, really good scientist and a really good communicator about something. I don't know, right? There are a lot of ways to be that ambassador. It's hard sometimes, and you guys all know this because we've been doing it for a year, it's hard to get that vibe over Zoom. It just is. So just like any kind of virtual process, you have to just project a little more to push through that screen. It's easier for us to feel in person just because of the nature of being in a room together. But I think, you know, we all take that into account as selection committees. Remains to be seen how interviews will proceed this year, whether those will be in person or in Zoom or a mix. And, you know, I think we'll just continue to try to give it our best shot and to be as fair as we can to all the candidates across the board.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that. Now, I do want to turn it over to the rest of you. I know we have a few minutes left. If anyone in the audience has a question, please do feel free to throw in the chat. Don't be shy. I'm happy to ask another question while we're waiting for that, if anyone wants.
Dan, you're muted.
Whoops, sorry about that. So I guess if anyone has taken their time to type out a question, Vince, I'm just asking you really quickly. What was something that surprised you about being a Marshall, or why you were studying that you weren't expecting beforehand?
How cool all the other Marshall scholars were. I have this idea that it'd be like this weird hyper-competitive space where everybody had a chip on their shoulder and everybody's competing to be like the best. And there was like one, maybe two people like that in my whole class of Marshall scholars. And we sort of like, handled them, and everybody else was super cool. I've got this beautiful memory of being in the airport in Washington, D.C., getting ready to fly over to London. And like there were 4 violinists who had all brought their violins with them to the airport, and they just took out their violins and started playing this beautiful quartet. And like me and several other Marshall scholars just standing around crying, like, this is so beautiful. So that's probably it.
All right. Well, if no one else has any questions, it's fine. I just want to say quickly, for everyone's awareness. Oh, you have a question. Sorry. Vince and Dr. Clark, how much contact did you have with faculty from your respective programs before applying? Had you talked to research plans, etc.? Either of you would like to take that one?
I can jump in a little bit. So the answer is none. And I didn't really know what I was doing. And I came from, I went to Tulane in New Orleans, and we're a pretty small liberal arts college. And I think they're probably a whole lot more sophisticated about this now than they were when I was doing it. But nobody really knew that much about like the programs that were going on. Like the internet was pretty new, you guys. So there was just a lot less you could find out about what was happening. And so I gave it my best shot. But I got to Oxford, and like the first week, the history faculty sat me down and they were like, we weren't really sure about you. We didn't know what to do with you. What you're proposing makes no sense. Here's what you should be doing instead. And so, we kind of figured it out over time. But I think that the amount of information that's available now, and the accessibility to how programs are working, how faculty members, are accepting students, especially if you're applying for a research program or a DPhil or something that is, more research than taught, it would be good to have a clear understanding of what you're trying to do.
Okay, and then I do want to get to this last question we've gotten. Are there any significant application differences between the 1-year and 2-year scholarship tracks when you recommend someone apply for one and not the other? For any of you, really, if anyone wanted to weigh in on that particular question.
I mean, I can talk about it a little bit. So yeah, the 1-year Marshall is envisioned as just as good as the 2-year Marshall. Like you need to have just as compelling an argument. Like really the rationale is there may be certain people or in certain situations for whom one year in the UK makes a lot of sense. And so if that is you'll know, right? Like if there is one program for 1 year and then you've got a compelling thing that happens after that, and there's a logical sequence of events, that is the ideal situation for a 1-year Marshall. I mean, speaking from my sort of personal experience, I would say there's a lot of merit to spending time in the UK, and it takes a while to kind of figure out what you're doing. And a big part of the experience of being a Marshall Scholar is that immersive process of just living and breathing and working alongside your colleagues and, fellow academics in a UK university setting. So if you're thinking, well, I don't know, I'm not really sure, just think through it carefully. And again, make the most compelling case for your course of study that you can. Seek out some advice. This is where your fellowships office is going to be really helpful, as well as faculty who have had experience in the UK, because the degree programs in graduate school is just structured a little differently.
Yeah, if I may, I just want to echo with what Dr. Clark has just mentioned. Speak with your fellowship advisor. We'll be happy to discuss with you whether or not a 1-year or the 2-year program is more applicable or adequate. But I would say go for the full 2-year funding. There are so many options that you have. You could come away with 2 1-year master's degrees, and let's say you have multifaceted interests, take advantage of that. And again, 1 year, you're just kind of figuring out what you're doing and you're becoming acclimated. So my biggest piece of advice is if you have the opportunity to pursue 2 years, go for that. But that's what your fellowship advisor is there here for you. We're here to discuss the variety of possibilities and, you know, talk you through them. And as Dr. Clark mentioned, faculty, especially those within your field who may be able to recommend programs in the UK, they may say, you know, no, you need to stay for 2 years, or, well, okay, 1 year should be fine, especially if you're planning to apply for a PhD in the US, or you're planning to start medical school, depending on your program. So, you know, again, your fellowship advisor and faculty, you should consult with them.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. I know there are a couple more questions in the chat. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I want to respect the time of everyone here. There is a great fact on the Marshall Scholarship website, which is marshallscholarship.org. Also, as we've discussed, you know, your fellowship advisors, you can reach out to your local British consulates if you have questions. Staff like myself and Hillary are here. This is our job, as much as we can, to help you answer these questions. So yeah, thank you, three of you, or your panelists, for joining. This has been really fantastic, I think. And we had a big audience here that I hope really appreciates this, because there were some fantastic insights that, you know, as someone who helps manage this program, I can definitely say were really useful. So thank you all. Thanks for joining. Like I said,